Okay, let's do this. Okay. Okay, well, tell me what you want the title to be. What's the title?
There's an I in team.
There's an I in team. Okay, so why do you want to name it that?
Because there's such a big influence that one person can have over a whole group, like when it comes to attitude or competitiveness in practice.
So what's your how does that relate to your team thing exactly? Like how does that translate to that?
I think like the goal that I have for the team was to raise the level at practice or like have some sort of influence where I can be super competitive and then it allows others to try to either mimic that or have to beat me in some way. I don't know.
So it's basically competitiveness,
Yeah.
right? Probably put that on your hood if you can. Yeah. Competitiveness and like competitive contagiousness basically.
Yeah. Like how can
Low
you
key that should have been the
spread
title.
competitive contagiousness?
Yeah. What's been your, I guess, throughout your experience in athletics, have you seen people that are like good models of that? Like have you ever had like a good person you're like that's made you better because of that? Like where, you know what I mean?
Yeah. At my last school, I really looked up to one of our outsiders that played beach. Her name's Haley Nelson. Like we got to work with her a little bit, but it was cool because in beach, like she was just like super competitive, and it wasn't, I guess, like her first chosen sport. But she was like, if you're not gonna win on the court, she's gonna beat you in the parking lot. Like she's just so competitive that like she has to beat you in one way, and it translated into practice. Like she had to win the drills, like she had to do this, and you were trying to beat her because it was fun to, you know.
So I have a two-part question with that.
Yeah.
One, do you think that she's just born that way? And two, do you think that, like, I guess, how did other people respond to her being that way?
I think for the first part, I don't think she was totally born that way. Like I think that she's a competitive person, but I think being at San Jose and then playing as long as she did, because I got to meet her during like her senior season or like towards her senior season, and I think that she became that way almost in a sense. Like a lot of people just hate losing so much that they develop into this kind of sense, and I feel like she developed into being that kind of way.
You feel like she developed into that because of a hatred of losing?
I feel like she hates losing so much that she has to find a way to win.
And that the hatred of losing built up over time, basically?
Yeah, I don't know what like the previous seasons were, but I know that with like, because I came in with Trent and it was like a different coaching system, and they took off after that season. So I think that like maybe she just got tired of, I don't know, not playing, or maybe she didn't like losing or whatever it was, and then it snapped because every time she went in, like you could feel her court presence.
So do you believe that basically growing as a competitor comes from pain?
Yes, that sounds really bad, but like I have this theory that like participation medals like make athletes like soft. Like it sounds crazy, but you hate,
Doesn't sound crazy to me.
you don't like hate losing enough because you get a participation medal. Like when you hate losing, you're gonna find a way to not lose. Like
Yeah.
I think a lot of people nowadays like don't hate losing enough, and so it's like easy for them to be like, okay, like lesson or whatever, like whatever. They don't find a way to win in that situation.
So do you think that, well, we've gone away from my other two-part
Yeah,
question, but one
two-part.
question is like, do you think that it's beneficial for a coach or for a teammate or for somebody, even your parents, to amplify losing?
I think like for me, I used to hate like driving home after a loss because my dad would just be like grilling me, you know, like you have that one parent that played sports and so they're like trying to get on you, and I hated getting talked. So I would always like try to win so I just didn't have to hear this talk. But I think it actually made me better because it gave me another outside incentive to want to win. Like not just for myself or for like if coaches were there recruiting, like it's also so on the 45-minute home drive from Sandbar I don't get chewed out the whole way.
Yeah. And so back to my second part of the question, like with Haley being so like die hard, gotta win. Did you notice the way that your teammates or her teammates responded or interacted with that? Did it elevate them? Did they like distance themselves from that? Like, did it polarize people? Like, how does it affect the team?
I think that it raised the level in some ways, and then in other ways, I feel like when it came to a loss, like, because you could just feel her almost like anger with it, that like, and almost like disappointment, that it puts another pressure on you to get into that next week of practice almost. Like it kind of fueled in a way of positivity, but also negativity.
Do you feel like you respond that way to losses?
I hate losing, but I think that I put a lot of pressure on myself that I just spiral almost in a sense when I think about it too much, and I almost have to like take a step back so I don't just like think about it nonstop and almost get into a mental hole. Like it takes me a step back where I can like be mad, take a step back, and then evaluate, and then use it in practice.
Yeah, it's tricky because like everyone's definitely different in that regard. Like the pain of losing or the frustration in losing, I think in the management of that presents itself really differently in different people, you know?
Yeah. I feel like it's a lot of in-game scenarios for me. Like, I know a lot of players like try to stay the same with their emotions throughout the game, but if like we're running a play in defense and I'm supposed to get a dig and I don't get it, like I'm gonna hit the sand and be like, well damn, like that was my ball, like I should have gotten this, and it puts another level of pressure on myself. And I feel like carrying that into practice like helps you in those game situations.
Yeah. So you felt like when there was a team that had a good model of competitiveness, that people, like, what is it that you felt like, how did it elevate the team? Did they feel pressure to be on that same level? Did they feel pressure to like respect that person? Like how exactly did it elevate that team?
Well, like specifically like last year where I was, it like definitely motivated people to get on the same page. Like we had a lot of cooperational drills. We had to get a certain number of balls, and Haley was really vocal, and Sienna and Jada were really vocal, and it helps you. But then we also had these like big and small rocks, and I remember one of my big rocks was to not be nice. I was being too nice in practice, and I was being too nice to my partners, where I was like, hey, like it's okay, like you messed up, like you got the next one, instead of being like, you know what to do. And I feel like when I'm playing with Natalie here, it's super blunt, it's super dry, and like we put our heads down and get work done because like we can communicate on that level.
Yeah. I guess back to the participation medal thing. You acknowledged just a second ago that like how you handle the frustration of losing is maybe different than other people. Like doesn't sound like you're as hard on yourself as Haley is on herself, right? So I guess post-game response is a spectrum, right? So in that regard, is participation medals a problem? Because some people may need more of like a positive, hey, like you did good, like you tried, like whatever. That may motivate them. I guess like I know what I think, but I don't know what but you already kind of admitted like there is a spectrum of like for me, for example, like when I lose, like I'm not a good loser. Like, I'm not a graceful loser. And in fact, this might be toxic, but I kind of feel like staying in the loss a little bit, like lingering in it, kind of helps me in the long run. Because it's like, I'm like, I don't want to feel that. I want to like, it's kind of like you avoiding the car ride home. It's like, I want to avoid the like self-loathing after a loss, right? So now I'm old enough to know like, I don't mind staying in it a little bit because like, I feel like it drives me a little bit, I don't
Yeah.
feel like I get better by being like, thinking about the good things that I did.
Yeah. I think that it's kind of like a spectrum in a sense because, like, I think with your record and stuff, like when you continuously keep losing and there's different reasons why you're losing and you keep thinking about all those little reasons, then it's going to affect your practice, it's going to affect your play. But I think there's a good side of like reflecting after a game and being like, I messed up with my errors, or I messed up with hitting errors, serving errors, like setting errors, whatever it is, and you can reflect on it and then take it into practice. But are you going to let it like ruin almost your outside life of volleyball in a sense?
Yeah,
Like,
well, for
where's
sure.
the line, I guess?
Yeah, and I kind of take back what I said. Actually, I actually don't know if it's good for me because I have always struggled with like frustration after like poor performance, and I have grown a lot in that regard. But I definitely still, I don't know what's like the best response because
Yeah.
I kind of believe that, and I've said this to y'all, like I think I kind of believe that pain is a driver of change.
Yeah.
But I guess it has to exist within a certain threshold. It can't be too much because then
Yeah.
it will like decline performance. But it can't be too little because then it's not important enough to change.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess the hardest thing to do is figure out, how to find that right threshold.
I feel like there's bigger, like, outside motivators that I have, like, within, like, big losses where it came, like, I felt like I had losses in, like, recruiting wise or, like, communication wise when I was, like, in juniors. And it almost gave me, like, a chip on my shoulder. Like, I took those losses that I felt like I had and carried them into my game. But then on a small scale, like, taking those losses in games and learning from them is different than carrying them with you. I feel like certain losses
Yeah.
you carry with, and then other losses you have to like learn from and let go. But I feel like
Yeah.
I've always had like two different perspectives where like I've always been like, well, the first to fail is the first to learn, like if you fail hard, you're gonna learn hard. But then also in a sense like you don't want to fail. Like you want to get to a point where you've stopped failing and you start winning. So when do you start hating that failing process, hating that learning process, and actually winning?
Yeah. It kind of goes back to the original topic, which is like, your theory is that one person can have a strong influence on the team.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't know to what degree that's true. It could be true. It could also not be true.
Yeah.
It could be true that people are influenced by their environment. It could also be true that people are who they are. Like some people are it's never gonna be as important to people to be competitive as it is to other people.
Yeah.
So I guess, to what degree do you feel like, when you say one person can have influence, like, why do you believe that?
I think like in the recruiting process when we were like talking about me coming in and stuff, I was like really wanting to mesh with the team in a sense and like influence them in a positive way. Like I'm coming in from an outside school and like I've known a lot of these girls growing up and I feel like people were on the fence about me personally, like who I was as a player and a person. So I wanted to come in and be competitive, but then also kind of win them over in a sense to trust me to like listen if I have something to say at practice or to like follow in those competitive footsteps. But I feel like another aspect that we had talked about was like the few people that are those competitive people that are going to be playing and competing hard in practice and showing that on the court, like you either get on board with them or you're left behind. You're not playing in the lineup, you're not doing as well in practice, like, and you hate where you are. But when you can continuously be competitive in those situations, it almost makes you like exponentially better, I feel like competitiveness is something that you have to have. Like you almost have to have this sense to be in a college sport because that's the whole point of why you're here. Like a lot of us at this school are here for volleyball because we love volleyball and we want to compete. So it's like, how can you change that in practice and almost make it to where you're going to compete in games?
Yeah, I mean, I think being competitive is not binary. I don't think it's you either are or you aren't.
Yeah.
I think everyone has a different level of it. And I guess I'm curious to what degree that level can be increased. You know, like if you think that you're a whatever 8 out of 10, or maybe I don't know what you think you are, but other people on the team are maybe lower or maybe higher. And I guess I'm curious, like, do you feel like your level has changed in your life?
I feel like my level has definitely changed. I feel like coming here, there is like a lot of good skilled defenders. Like I remember coming in and Elena winning like Queen of the Beach, and I was like, wow, I have to look out for her. Like,
Yeah.
like I can't underestimate Tori, like, because I had played her in juniors and I thought she was super underrated too. Like, there's all these good players that we have, and it almost made me more competitive because I was like, I have to earn my spot. Like, I have to step up and actually earn it. Like, I have to work to win. And I like those competitiveness in practice. Like, when me and Natalie would play against each other last semester, I felt super competitive against her. Like, I played with Mol and she got fired up, which was really cool because she's kind of like an introvert in a sense. So it's awesome seeing her get like a little pissed off and like starting to get heated. And I play better when I'm heated and mad anyway, so it's kind of fun to have those mini competitions and competitiveness between players in practice because it raises the level of play. It's like there's almost in a sense where you had talked about kind of with the season that we've had that our practices are almost like more competitive against each other than when we're playing our actual components, which is super interesting to me because we have to find a way to take that competitiveness between ourselves and integrate that like into
Yeah.
the games.
Yeah, it's funny you said that because people often say like, "Oh, we want our practices to be more competitive in the games." You know, which, yeah, I think ours are, but then it's like we view the games as like something completely different, so like
Yeah.
it doesn't translate. It's
Yeah.
weird. So, you know, I agree with you for sure that the competitiveness raises the level of play. Like basically you're comparing yourself ultimately manifests itself in the way of like competing and raising the level of like the competitiveness of your court.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot of other people don't compare themselves to others in that way, or it's not healthy for them to do so. So I guess, do you feel like that's your responsibility or not?
I sometimes feel like it's my responsibility in a sense because I don't know. Like we have a pretty young team and I can't ever tell like sometimes I can't tell like what's their drive, I guess in a sense, like players on our team. I'm like, what why are you here? Like what makes you want to win? Like what are things that happen that like push you to be here? And it's part of that is like internal, like it's a reflection of yourself, like and why you're here, but also like I felt like I changed last year when I had Haley and Sarah and Jada and Sienna like pushing me to be more competitive, and I started in the fives and had to like work my way up and like switch positions halfway through. Like I had never practiced blocking that entire time and then switched to split. So it's like a responsibility on yourself to internalize, but you can also influence other people and make
Yeah.
it a responsibility to raise up your team and get them into that more competitive state.
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree with you. I do believe that like the sort of the hard variable is like time. It's like how long does it take people to learn, to observe and learn and model and like evolve behaviors.
Yeah.
You know, because like definitely for sure, like maybe you don't understand their motivations right now because you can't see them. So all you can do is just show them whatever your authentic way of competing and being motivated is, and it will give them ultimately freedom to like do that for themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just a interesting topic to me because it is. There's not a clear like line of like causation.
Yeah.
You know, I can't figure out like it's not just that when people see competitive people around them, it makes them more competitive.
Yeah.
It's not just that. It's way more complex than that. And I don't know exactly what it is, because sometimes people actually distance themselves from people who like are unapologetically competitive.
Yeah. I like remember because I'm a transfer, but I heard like last year, like it was kind of tough because people could like reject a player from like trying to be more competitive or like trying to be an influence. And we have talked about like how we are such a nice team, you know what I mean? Like we're really great people, great girls and stuff, but like how can you flip off that switch and like when you step on the court, you can leave your outside life behind and just be a dog, like be just mean on that court because that's what really matters. Like I feel like I play the best when I'm like mad and there's pressure and my partner's like barking down my neck and I'm like, cool, like I got this. It's like a weird kind of.
Yeah, and that might be a maturity thing because I think what common theme there is that, and you've expressed this right now in this own conversation, is like what's good for you doesn't always feel good for you.
Yeah.
You know?
Like I had a lot of self-reflection because like it's hard to come from a different school because you always have something to compare because it's not like this is the only place that you have. And so I constantly was thinking like, do I thrive better in a toxic environment? Like, do I thrive better under pressure? And if I do, then how can I put that into practice? Because if it's just a positive environment in practice and we're all nice to each other and stuff, then am I really getting everything that I can get out of it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've been trying to say is that when we're like off the court and we're having conversations like this, we have to be able to have the clarity of mind to be able to say, I know that what is going to make me the best, for example, beach volleyball competitor is maybe some friction in practice.
Yeah.
The hard thing is that when we are in practice, we're not thinking that clearly.
Yeah.
So when there's friction or when there's like rivalry or whatever, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
It feels, we're very naturally, I feel, averse to those situations. We're like, we want to protect ourselves and our egos and our comfort zones. That's like our body's like natural, like primal way of interacting with the world is to protect its like sense of like homeostasis.
Yeah.
And so it takes a lot of discipline, I think, to in those moments recognize that I should be actively wanting this to be this way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I feel like it's interesting because like a lot of teams across like beach volleyball and NCAA, they have this like family type of culture. Like they always want to have this family stuff. But I think it's a good point to bring up that like siblings fight all the time. Like,
Right.
and it's like you kind of have to have that like sibling rivalry within the family culture to get something out of it. And I remember like in the fall, because me and Natalie were like competing against each other a lot and like now we play together, but I remember people being like after practice like, you and Natalie were like at each other's throats, like it was so awkward. And I was like, it was also probably one of the best drills that we've had, one of the hardest competitions we've had, like going at each other. And then we can go have like, we did trivia together last semester and stuff like that right after. So it's like, how can you separate your relationship on the court and like in practice with people versus off the court? It's like a good balance to have.
Yeah, I mean that's where probably the modeling comes really into play is like people seeing you get into these chippy situations and then handle it with grace or with maturity or with like intelligence. People will see like, oh, like it's okay if it gets like that sometimes.
Yeah. I remember one time like the score had gotten wrong when we were playing Natalie and she ended up losing and she had beaten me a bunch of times too, so it was always pretty back and forth. And I had like made a comment and I could see that she hated losing and my comment just was like salt on the wound. And I went up to her after and I was like, just had to make sure that like we were still good because I knew that like immediately as I said it, like I could see something.
Yeah.
But also like don't let me get the chance to beat you and to rub it in your face. You know what I mean? Like, beat me so you don't have to hear me chirp about it after, you know? It's like a different, it's kind of, it sounds toxic in a sense where it's like, do it, but then you have the bragging rights and you have to be like, okay, well, now she can't chirp at me, you know what I mean? She can't say anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I think we oftentimes forget what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like, when we're in a competitive environment, like, it's not normal life. Normal life is like, you want to foster like positive, comforting like situations for yourself.
Yeah.
When we're competing, it's like we should be actively trying not to do that.
Yeah.
At least with the opponents.
Yeah.
And I think we just forget that, you know, we forget that it's like a different environment.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess, I don't know, how does that, I mean, just speak a little bit more on like how you feel like the recognition of that relates to you imposing that knowledge on the team.
I have this like dream, and it's like crazy, but I have this dream that like, because beach volleyball is such a nice sport almost in a sense, like a lot of girls like come from suburbia or like a nicer family and all this stuff, but I have this dream that it's like blue collar and competitive, and like we're chirping through the net, you know what I mean, versus other teams, and like being super competitive in that way, because other sports do it all the time, you know what I mean? Like, you see it in every aspect, but for some reason in our sport, it's almost like we're too nice. And it's like, I have this like idea that if I do this in practice and we chirp through the court, then maybe when you play someone that you know from juniors, you know, at a different school, you could be like, oh, like, I know you always hit this, like, watch out, like, I'm gonna dig this all day. Or like, oh, I know you always serve here when you toss with two hands, like, I know your shit, like, I know your tactics. So it's like, how can we translate that even into a broader scale and make the sport even more competitive, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, I think part of the problem there is that, which speaks to this whole we're different in practice on the game thing, is that part of you being competitive and confrontational in practice is actually only happening because of the relationships you have with the people on the team, right? So why would you expect that to happen in a game against somebody you don't know? You know?
I think because volleyball is such a mental game, like, you kind of like try to pick at the person who's like gonna spiral or crash the most. Like, you're like, I'm gonna yell super loud through the net, I'm gonna get in her face. Like, if she errs, like, I'm gonna celebrate like nobody's business. Like, when they give us 3 points, like, we're gonna cheer about that. And it's like, it comes on the sidelines, but it's also can happen in the court. So it's really interesting because I feel like there's different ways that the practice competition translates into gameplay, and it's not the same. But it's smaller and almost more overlooked, I feel like, because there's so many things that you can do that influence a player.
Just to go back to the sibling analogy, like, you fight with your siblings, you know, or you maybe make fun of your siblings or, like, you know, poke them, whatever.
Yeah.
But you would never do that with a stranger.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the hard thing about what is happening on our team, is that maybe we can create that in practice, but then, like, we don't feel comfortable doing that to what are essentially strangers when we play other teams.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you, like, reference them as to strangers, because I feel like that there's been so many teams, like Tulane we've played a bunch of times in our schedule, and like there's been some like elevation there, but also like what is it, we've played like Natalie transferred from Houston Christian or HBU, and like we've played them, or like Abby knows a lot of girls from ULM because she played there, like, and we've played them. So a lot of times, like, at least for me, like, I know at least one person on that team. And I had a really great time actually at South Carolina, because when our ones were playing, Skylar Allen, she's from Texas, and Simone, like, I had always like seen her because she grew up in Austin. She's a little bit older than me. I was watching them play, and I remember like Simone didn't steal a line on one of her blocks, and I like screamed her name, and I was like, "Don't forget to steal a line. Your defender's doing all the work." And Skylar came up to me after and was like, that was amazing. Like, I loved your shit talking. Like, it was so good. And she was talking about how, like, she's one of the people on her team that does it, and it's, like, really rare. But we ended up becoming friends after and exchanging info and want to play against, like, with each other and against each other, like, over summers and stuff. So it's, like, almost like game recognizes game. Like, you can do this to other people and chirp on the sidelines, and there's going to be people that hate it and it gets under their skin, but then there's also going to be people where it helps them thrive. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, two questions about that. One, you know, what about situations like where you just don't know anybody? Like, there is no, you know, like, you're having to create friction with a stranger. Like, I guess maybe you're willing to do that, but, like,
Yeah, not a lot of people
not a lot of people are. So, like, you know, how do we draw a line from, like, a lot of the things that happen is, like, we only actively engage in competition, most of us, in environments we feel comfortable in.
Yeah.
Which is, like, such a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I guess my question about that is, like, does that mean that we have to create some type of familiarity in order to feel confident enough to compete freely? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't know if it's necessarily familiarity or if it's, like, capitalizing on points that almost make you mad. Like, when you, like, see the blocker touch the net, or, like, you see her touch a ball, she's not truthful and the ref didn't see. Like, how can you, like, hate that, losing that point because you know you're supposed to win it, internalize it, and then put it on the court? Like, I remember playing with Maul, and, like, she got really mad after this one point. Next was, like, a thank you dig, and she, like, crushes it down your face. You know what I mean? Like,
So maybe it's like we all need to actively seek the drivers of our own competitiveness.
yeah, I don't think we know as a team. Like, I feel like I have come into knowing, but because we have such a young team, I don't know what people really, like,
Right.
feel,
What drives
like,
them.
what makes them, what drives
So
them.
maybe that's part of your, like, maybe that's part of how this thing grows for you, is, like,
Yeah,
is getting to the, helping individuals get to the root of, like, what drives them to compete,
yeah,
and then helping them look for those moments or situations when they're in an unfamiliar environment.
yeah. Bless you.
So, like, for example, if someone's drive for competing is, like, to play for their partner or their team,
Yeah,
then it's like, where can they find that thing when we're in New Orleans this weekend? Like, how can they find that? You know, your thing is a lot more confrontational. It's a lot more like,
it's a lot in your face.
it's a lot more like me versus you.
Yeah,
So, you can find that in a lot of different ways, right?
yeah,
You know, so
other
maybe that's part of
people-
your, like, thing,
yeah,
is helping people seek out, like, little, like, fuel that they can find
yeah.
in competition, you know?
I feel like I've almost, like, failed in that sense, because I kind of assumed that, like, people would be more like me in a sense when it comes to stuff. But what really helped was that practice, like, getting everyone's definition of competitiveness, because they were all completely different. They all had similar aspects, but every person, like, grouped them differently.
I was gonna ask you about that. So, like, what surprised you there, or what were some answers that when you asked people to how they define competitiveness?
Some people, it was completely non-skill related. It was completely not volleyball related. It was like, how loud are you? What's your presence? Like, what is it? Where other people were like, are you touching every ball in defense? You know what I mean? Like, are you hitting on vanilla? Like, are you cheering for your partner? Are you chirping through the net? Which is super interesting, because it almost was like two groups. Whereas, like, a lot of people took the outside factors and a lot of people took the inside factors.
So a lot of people view competitiveness as, like, what's observable.
Yeah. It was all completely observable. It was all, like, it was all presence-based in a sense of, like, if I'm going to touch every ball, it's going to make you second guess something when you're hitting. Whereas, like, if I'm yelling after every error you make, it's also going to make you think, you know? So it's like two different aspects that both apply and both almost put pressure, in a sense, on the other side of the net.
So do you think that competitiveness is always observable in some way?
I don't think so. I think it's super internalized almost, whereas like some games I feel super competitive internally, and people can rate me a 1 or a 2 in practice of my competitiveness, where I feel like, you know, I'm beating a team 21-10 in practice, but I'm not yelling, I'm silent cheering, I'm trying to increase the speed of the game and the pace of the game and like other aspects where maybe they don't realize like those are the things that we're doing. So I feel like strategy and game plan comes into that.
So you don't feel that competitiveness, the nature of the definition, the nature of competitiveness requires observation or interaction? Like, did you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, not 100% of the time. I think that competitiveness can be completely unobservable.
Because let me be devil's advocate.
Yeah.
If competitiveness is completely unobservable, then I guess how is it competitiveness?
It's not competitive, yeah. I think that I'm thinking about like the internal game in a sense.
For sure, a lot is not observable.
Yeah.
But like,
It can't
to
be
me,
completely.
I guess to me, the nature of competitiveness requires an observer
Yeah.
or a person that competitiveness is acted on,
Yeah.
right? Or
I guess
a thing that it's acted on.
I guess it could be observable, at least from the other side, like when you're in a gameplay.
That's like what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Is like, and again, I guess it gets interesting when you think about like individual sports or individual tasks or things, but like, to me, competitiveness by definition, like philosophically speaking, I feel like requires a receiving party to like feel competing. To me means competing against something or for something or against someone. So like there's like a
Yeah.
there's like receptor of that, you know?
I think that that's the case most of the time, but what we've been doing in practice with like the hit 3 and all that stuff like that, a lot of times when I'm doing my ratings on those days, like people don't realize that I, you know, get it in 4 balls, or like I get it first try, or like I'm one of the first people done, you know what I mean? Like,
So for
that's
sure,
not observable.
for sure. But I guess my cheap counter argument to that is like, in those drills you've been doing, you're competing against like your past self. You know, you're trying to conquer your own mind, right? So it's like, in a way, it's like there are like 2 separate people there. It's like what who you are and who you're trying to be.
Yeah.
Or like, if you failed in it, if you did poorly on it the past week, then it's like imagine like a runner just running that just runs every day, right? They're competing against something, right? The clock or themselves or their own development, right? And so in a way that is like sort of measurable and observable. You know, even if you're not loud or if you're not whatever, like if you're winning, that's measurable.
Yeah.
If you're, you know, so I'm really interested in like the indicators of competitiveness, and you should be too, because those are the things that are going to be influential to your teammates, right? Are like the things that they can observe, right? So if every day you do the rate me thing and everyone rates you a 2 every day, maybe you feel like you're a 5 out of 5, then are you having a positive competitive influence on the team?
Well, because it's not being observed and absorbed, it's almost not
Then
the
it's
point.
like, no, right?
But it's crazy because it's also like, I remember this one time at practice, like in the point where I was like, we beat them 21-10 and we were doing this stuff, but they're like, oh, we didn't feel like you were that competitive. You know, we didn't feel like the loudness in your presence or like whatever it is. but that was in their own definition almost. Like their own definition didn't allow them to think that the other side was being competitive, even though they lost by
Yeah.
a huge score, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that, like, score, I don't know if score alone is an indicator of competitiveness, because on one hand, you could argue that it is. On the other hand, it's like, when you think about your own mind and the degree to which you're, like, trying,
Yeah.
you can try not as hard as you can and still win big.
Yeah.
And people can still notice that. They can be like, oh, that person probably could have beat me 21-4,
Yeah.
whatever it is. So, yeah, I guess I'm interested in, like, how we can constantly be, like, having the needle, like,
Just keep going.
as high as it can,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I think that we've been doing that, honestly, like, without me being involved with, like, our setup and practice with, like, pressure situations a lot of the time. Because I feel like we don't feel certain pressures in games in the same way that we do in practice. It's almost kind of like a forget the last point sort of thing and keep moving. Or we do feel pressure in games and we don't feel it in practice.
Right.
So it's like trying to find the balance of the same pressure and in practice and in games. Because if we're practicing how we play, then that pressure should always be applied the same.
Yeah.
But it's also it's so internal to a person. So I feel like one of the things that I could have done better was like almost more one-on-one stuff. Like I did it a lot of both like me being rated, but like almost like what do you rate yourself, or like how do other people rate you, and like did you apply pressure on yourself and did you overcome it, did you crack to it, like stuff like that. I feel like would almost help elevate even more.
For sure. I mean, maybe it's like, hey, you know, Elena, I'm rating your competitiveness today.
Yeah.
Like, because it will force people to, like, think through their own, like, oh, well, what is that for me?
Yeah.
How am I driven?
Yeah.
You know, like, I think you have been, well, the idea of what you've been doing in terms of, like, having people rate your competitiveness is a good model of behavior. And eventually it should transition to, like, being imposed upon others.
Yeah.
You know, it's a delicate balance, because, you know, I guess it kind of comes back to, like, one of the core things in your thing is, like, does modeling behavior, is that all you need to do? You know, like, does all you need to do model good competitiveness and it will make people more competitive, or does something else? Is something else going to help it be more effective, more contagious?
I feel like it's both, because it's that sense of like, it's like get on board or you're left behind. But also as a team, like I could model something, but I don't want to leave players behind. Like I don't want them to not feel that competitiveness or not want to get better, more competitive, or feel that pressure. So then it's like you kind of have to do both ends of like model and then help reel in other people. Because it's like the theory of like you're going to get on board or left behind is fine, but we can't really leave people behind because we're only as strong as our weakest link. So
Yeah, that's well said.
it's like we're raising the bar almost. Like I feel like I'm trying to raise the bar, but I also need to like reel in where the lowest can be.
Yeah.
You know?
No, yeah. I feel that way all the time, for sure, as a coach. What other questions or topics do you feel are related to this? Or have we covered all of them?
I don't know. I just like think it's so interesting, the difference in like observable competition, like in a sport. Like my dad played football, and like he would be talking to the other team or like hitting super hard on the other team, and there's things that you could do that are observable in other sports. Where in beach volleyball, when I'm watching competitors or things, I see it more in like celebration or like execution. And it's like I have a really fun time watching AVP like mic'd up and stuff, you know, like free ice cream on a dig, or like, you know, screaming through the net, like, and watching the Crab Brothers play each other and have that like this like the sibling thing that we talked about, but actually on the court. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because it's like a lot of people play beach volleyball like when you watch a lot of games, it looks like two teams just trying to execute skills on their own side,
Yeah.
back and forth, right? Like, it looks like two teams
Yeah.
playing individual sports on
Yeah.
the same court.
Yeah.
That has been weird to me too,
Mm-hmm.
because there's definitely like an aspect of it that's missing, that I feel is missing, where like when you have an opponent, that's like another like variable in the equation,
Yeah.
you know? So, but yeah, as you've noticed and as you know, like not everyone views it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of the best players in the world even are just the ones that are able to focus the most on their side of the court
Yeah.
and win the like drill versus themselves.
Yeah. It's crazy that you mentioned that, because I was thinking about the difference in players, where you have the players that rely on energy and emotion and drive, almost in a sense, and those mini competitions to thrive with their voice, and then the people that like put their head down and just grind it out, like almost like they play the same from winning or losing. Like, I feel like I noticed that with like John Mayer and Betsy Flint, in a sense, where it's like I can't tell when they're winning and I can't tell when they're losing, like if you didn't show me the score. But then like with people where it's like Kelly Clay's, like she's gonna yell through the net and she's gonna get in your face when you get a block, you know what I mean? Like, you feel that presence. But I feel like when I play a team that's more head down or more almost like the same the whole time, like there's not a big margin, it's almost harder, because you want them to react. Like, you're trying to get a reaction out of them. You're trying to evoke emotion, where those players that rely on high energy or low energy switches, it's easier to influence almost in a sense, because they're going to have a response back through the net or through their play.
Well, that's something you should remember, in our own team, is that like the way people are going to grow competitively is going to be, some of them the same as you, some of them way different than you.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our players probably would benefit a lot from just like trying to complete their own tasks
Yeah.
really hard,
Yeah.
really, really diligently.
Yeah.
Other players would benefit from, competing against somebody on the other side of the net.
Yeah.
And so I think with your thing, it's like, how do you, if you want to influence people competitively, for sure, be an authentic model of competitiveness in your own way.
Yeah.
But also, like, if you want to start actually influencing the team, because I think about this all the time, like, definitely a lot of the team is not like the way I am, So I can't necessarily lead everyone that way.
Yeah.
So, if you want to influence an environment, it's like you really have to be aware of what that environment is and what the individual differences are in that environment. Like, so yeah, it might be useful for you to like do your rate me competitiveness thing, but like in different ways.
Yeah.
Like, ask one person to rate you, or
Yeah.
rate somebody else, or put someone else's name on the board and say, we're all going to rate this person.
Yeah.
Or say to the group, who was the most and who was the least today, or whatever, like to look at it from all these different angles.
Yeah.
Or say, hey, who was the most locked into their own side? Who was the most confrontational?
Yeah.
Who's like, look at all the different definitions of competitiveness,
Yeah.
and then ask and probe the team, build awareness in them from all those different angles and lenses,
Yeah, and I feel like our team doesn't really know completely like who they are on the competitiveness scale, so it almost would help them identify what leads them to play their best in those situations. And I think then it helps also like apply and practice, like, how can I get to this point of like an internal plus an external, or how I feel like I play best competitively, and kind of influence that environment, I guess.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see you do that, not only in practice, but like, we've played a lot of games now, so ask people like, hey, who, was your competitiveness level equal in all of your matches?
Yeah.
Why or why not?
Yeah.
What changed?
One of the things that I really liked was, because like my days are always Wednesday, but when it would move or switch where we were playing, was like when I played with Maul, Kelly, and Lizzie, I think in one weekend, or Maul and Kelly in one weekend, and our games were super different. Like it seems like we played very different, or at least I played very different with each of them, and I was like asking them after they watched Huddle to rate me and like what they felt I did, and almost the difference like in game, like how it felt, and then on film how it looked.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think you know, you have a lot of opportunity left this season to like explore the idea of influence.
Yeah.
You know, and your particular influence is trying to influence people from a competitive standpoint, right?
Yeah.
So it's like there's kind of two factors there. It's how do you define competitiveness? Can you grow as a competitor? You know, are you one way? Like how can your competitiveness be defined and fostered and evolved? Is like one part of your thing.
Yeah.
The other part of it is like how does one person influence a team?
Yeah.
Right? That's a whole separate set of questions. It's like it's how do people receive information? How aware are you of others other than yourself?
Yeah.
You know, like how can you influence someone who sees the world through a different lens than you do?
Yeah. I feel like it's hard too because there's times when like you try to confront someone or you try to give coaching to someone on the team that's your peer and it's not easily receptive.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like uncoachability from a peer, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's hard to have someone that's like your equal tell you something that you need to get better on, but almost in a sense that's not being competitive. Like you're not being coachable. You're not having or taking information from someone who's an outside perspective and listening to what they have to say, because it's exactly what I feel like I'm doing, where I'm like, from an outside perspective, like, am I competitive?
Yeah.
So it's like if someone comes, like when I come up to someone and I'm like, hey, like your handsets are really inconsistent because you're not following through every time, and then you give an excuse or a rebuttal, then it's like you're not taking that information and like implying it into your game or applying it into your game.
That's where I think as a peer you have to be really creative, because the best way to influence oftentimes is like direct confrontation and feedback.
Yeah.
Other times it's way different, you know? It's questions, or it's modeling, or it's stuff at the whiteboard, or it's competing against them and proving them that like their way's not good enough, or like, you know, beating them at their own thing, or like there's a lot of different ways to influence, and like I understand the difficulty in both giving and receiving feedback from a peer.
Yeah.
I think it is a sign of maturity.
Yeah.
But it definitely is not easy. So the solution is not always so direct. It's not always like,
it's
oh,
so
just
different
tell
for
people what to
everyone.
do.
It's so different for everyone.
You know, it's like, so it's an interesting like challenge. I mean, because the easy thing to do is lead by example.
Yeah.
Like that's good.
But there's so many more things.
There's like, that's honestly like the easiest version of leadership to me.
Yeah. I feel like now, after kind of like doing this social experiment for like how long, there's so many different things that I would do like these next few weeks and into the fall semester and into the spring semester if we're still doing this stuff, or even if we're not doing this stuff. Like I felt how much of an influence that like you can have, and I've also felt how little of an influence that you can have. So it's really interesting how it changes per person, and you have to change almost per person too, like in the way that you do it.
Yeah.
There's so many more ideas I feel like I have now after kind of evaluating season and evaluating practice, and like the changes that we've had in practice and responses to coaching or drills and everything, that it almost like helps shapes the future better. It's like kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's good. That's interesting for sure. Okay, well.
Good job.
All right, good job.
So what is it? Are we doing I in team, or are we doing what was it? Competitive